The wind roared down Fifth Avenue, shaking the store signs and making the autumn leaves swirl in the streets. Trevor pulled his coat tighter, trying to fend off the biting cold, but it wasn't just the chill that made him shiver. It was the uncertainty, the weight of unspoken words, and the constant fear lodged deep in his chest. In a city full of life, Trevor felt invisible. Not in the usual way, but in a way that cut deeper, gnawing at his sense of self. He lived in a world where his existence had to be hidden, a secret to guard carefully. The city thrived on its underground cultures, but only if you knew where to look. Even then, those places were risky. There were raids, arrests, and the shame that followed with names printed in the papers, lives destroyed. Trevor had seen it happen, not to women but to men like him, whose only crime was loving differently. Trevor had met Kevin on a night like this, cold and ominous, when the city felt like it was closing in on him. Kevin was a few years older, with a presence that commanded attention, but it was his kindness that drew Trevor in. They had met at one of those hidden places, a club where men like them could be themselves, if only for a few hours. Trevor remembered how Kevin had looked at him. Like he could see past the layers of fear and uncertainty Trevor wore like armor. Their relationship started carefully, each step cautious, as if one wrong move would break the fragile connection they were building. But with Kevin, Trevor found something new: acceptance. Kevin didn't just understand the fear and the need for secrecy. He lived it too. But he also believed in something more, something better. One night, after a particularly terrifying raid at the club, Trevor found himself in Kevin's arms, shaking from the close call. "I can't keep living like this," Trevor whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of his heart pounding. Kevin pulled him closer, his breath warm against Trevor's ear. "We don't have to, Trevor. We'll find a way. Together." But even as he said it, Trevor knew that hope was a luxury they could hardly afford. The world outside didn't care about their love, didn't care about them at all. And yet, in those quiet moments, with Kevin's arms around him, Trevor dared to believe in the possibility of a future. As the night deepened, the room seemed to close in around them, creating a world where only they existed. Their love was intense, like the city itself, vibrant, chaotic, and full of contradictions. They shared everything, from whispered secrets in the dead of night to stolen kisses in shadowed corners. But there was also a darkness, a weight that hung over them, a constant reminder of the danger they were in. They knew that one wrong move could mean the end of everything they had built together. One Sunday afternoon, just as the city was starting to wake from its weekend slumber, Trevor's world was shattered. They had been careless, too comfortable in the safety of Kevin's apartment. The knock on the door came suddenly, a sharp intrusion into their shared solitude. Trevor looked at Kevin, panic rising in his chest. "Don't worry," Kevin said, his voice steady, though Trevor could see the fear in his eyes. "It's probably just the landlord." But it wasn't the landlord. It was the police, and they had come with a warrant. Trevor's heart raced as they were both handcuffed, their lives exposed to strangers who looked at them with nothing but disdain. The charges were read aloud: lewd conduct. And with those two words, everything Trevor had feared came crashing down around him. At the police station, Trevor was separated from Kevin, thrown into a cell with nothing but his thoughts for company. He had known this could happen. It was a risk they took every time they were together. But knowing didn't make it any easier. Hours passed, each one blending into the next, until finally, the cell door creaked open. Trevor was released with a stern warning, but Kevin wasn't so lucky. He was older, a repeat offender in the eyes of the law, and they wanted to make an example of him. As Trevor walked out of the station, the cold air hitting his face like a slap, he felt more alone than ever before. Kevin was gone, and with him, the fragile hope that Trevor had clung to. The days after Kevin's arrest felt like a nightmare Trevor couldn't escape. The city, once so full of life, now seemed dull, just a shadow of what it had been when Kevin was with him. Trevor wandered the streets, retracing the paths they'd walked together, but every corner, every familiar spot, only reminded him of the emptiness now in his life. He had tried to visit Kevin, but the authorities made it clear Trevor wasn't welcome. It wasn't just the law that kept them apart. It was the fear gripping Trevor's heart. Fear of what people would say, fear of being seen, fear of what might happen if he reached out to the man he loved. Weeks turned into months, and still, there was no word from Kevin. Trevor kept his head down, trying to blend in, to survive. But every day was a struggle, a constant battle against the weight of his own thoughts. He thought about leaving the city, starting over somewhere new, but the idea of leaving Kevin behind felt like a betrayal. Then one day out of the blue, Trevor got a letter. It was from Kevin's sister, someone Trevor had never met but knew about from the few stories Kevin had shared. The letter was short, written in neat, careful handwriting, and it delivered the news Trevor had dreaded but somehow expected. Kevin was gone. He had taken his own life in the prison cell, unable to bear the shame and hopelessness that had consumed him. Trevor read the letter over and over, the words blurring as tears filled his eyes. The pain was overwhelming, a crushing weight on his chest that made it hard to breathe. Kevin was gone, and with him, the light that had made Trevor's life worth living. But there was something else in the letter, something that caught Trevor's attention even in the midst of his grief. Kevin's sister mentioned that Kevin had left something for Trevor, a package she was holding on to. She invited Trevor to come and collect it when he was ready. It took Trevor several days to gather the courage, but eventually, he found himself standing outside a small house in a quiet part of the city. Kevin's sister, a woman in her early 30s with the same dark eyes as Kevin, greeted him with a sad smile. "I'm so sorry for your loss," she said softly, leading him inside. "Kevin spoke of you often. He cared about you very much." Trevor nodded, unable to find the words to express the turmoil inside him. Kevin's sister handed him a small box, wrapped in plain brown paper, and gestured for him to sit down. "He wanted you to have this," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "He said it was important." With shaking hands, Trevor unwrapped the package. Inside was a collection of letters, handwritten by Kevin during his time in prison. There were also a few photographs, candid shots of the two of them, smiling and happy, taken during their stolen moments of joy. Trevor read the letters in silence, his heart breaking with each word. Kevin had poured out his soul onto the pages, expressing his love, his fears, and his regrets. He wrote about the life they could have had, the dreams they shared, and the deep sadness he felt at not being able to see those dreams come true. But there was something else in the letters, something that made Trevor's blood run cold. Kevin had mentioned a secret, something he had never told Trevor, something that had haunted him for years. It was the reason he had been so afraid, the reason he had kept certain parts of his life hidden. Kevin had been with someone else before Trevor, a man who had used Kevin's love against him, threatening to expose him if he ever tried to leave. Kevin had been stuck in that relationship for years, too scared to speak out, too ashamed to ask for help. It was only after meeting Trevor that he found the courage to break free, but the scars from that time never healed. As Trevor read the last letter, he felt a rush of anger and sadness, a mix of emotions that left him shaken. Kevin had never deserved the pain he endured, and yet, in the end, it had consumed him. Trevor felt a deep sense of guilt, wondering if there was something he could have done, something that might have saved Kevin from his fate. But guilt wasn't enough to bring Kevin back. All Trevor could do now was honor Kevin's memory, to remember the love they had shared and the man Kevin had been. It was a love that had been real, even if the world refused to acknowledge it. In the weeks that followed, Trevor found himself going back to the places they had visited together. He would sit for hours, lost in thought with memories of Kevin as his constant companion. But as time passed, Trevor realized he couldn't stay in the city forever. The pain was too much, the reminders too overwhelming. So one evening, as the sun set over the city, Trevor packed his bags and left. He didn't know where he was going, only that he needed to start over, to find a place where he could heal, where he could remember Kevin without the constant ache in his chest. But even as he left, Trevor knew Kevin would always be a part of him. The love they had shared, the struggles they had faced, the dreams they had dreamed, those things would stay with him, no matter where he went. And maybe, just maybe, in another time, another place, they would find each other again, free from the shadows that had haunted their lives.